Where to even begin when it comes to talking about Vegas and space? A larger-than-life, all-drag queen production about sex-changing special agents trying to save the world, with a behind-the-scenes backstory that contrasts so strongly against what's presented in the film that the tonal whiplash may well render you decapitated. I suppose I should start at the beginning. Vegas in Space began life back in either 1982 or 1983 when, during a party being held at the apartment of one Ginger Quest and Doris Fish, the pair alongside Philip R. Ford, Miss X and a handful of other drag performers decided to improvise scenes from a surrealist matriarchal society set 300 years in the future and in space. It must have been a hell of a party because where most would have seen it as a fun night's entertainment, to be looked back on fondly, Philip and Doris instead saw potential. And from the ideas raised at that party came a roughly hashed out treatment for what would eventually develop into Vegas in Space. The title of which I believe is borrowed from a 1979 episode of Buck Rogers in the 25th Century. I don't believe either of them realised at the time, however, the pathway that lay before them. Because shortly after completing the script, I'm not entirely convinced this wasn't largely improvised dialogue-wise, the trio decided to take the brave step of turning it into a full-blown movie. None of them had any experience in filmmaking whatsoever, and this would turn out to be the start of an 8-year production cycle, with filming and post-production totalling 18 months across that 8-year window, as the production had to constantly stop and start due to inconsistent funding. And when I say inconsistent funding, I mean that Doris and Philip funded the film almost entirely themselves, with Doris working as a call boy and donating large chunks of their earnings from that to help fund the production. They shot the film largely in Doris and Ginger's San Francisco apartment using a mixture of returned offcuts of film and videotape. It was a real ramshackled labour of love. I don't know how convicted you need to be in order to fight for something you believe in, but this film convinced a dozen drag artists to work together for 8 years and literally get fucked to fund it. So damn it, they must have absolutely goddamn believed this thing had legs. But it's here, sadly, that the story takes a tragic turn, as just as the film was nearing completion in 1991, both Doris, who was the writer of the film, its chief financier, and the lead actor, Captain Tracy Daniels, and Tippy, who the film gifts an introducing credit to, who plays Princess Angel, passed away due to complications from AIDS in June and August of 1991 respectively. Vegas in Space would complete post-production and receive a release in October of 1991, and two of the film's biggest contributors to making it happen never got to see it. Which, honestly, is beyond heartbreaking to me. But time marches on, as it tends to do, and the film was completed and released. And, eventually, the distribution rights were picked up, both surprisingly and unsurprisingly by Troma. I first heard about this film around 2014 when it was covered by Diamanda Hagen on her channel, and as a big fan of the work of Tom Rubnitz, the vibe this film gave off absolutely captured my imagination. But that was where I hit my first snag, as the film was only available in the US and import fees are the devil. So I had to wait, keeping the film in the back of my mind for the better part of a decade until friend of the show and owner of the universe's flattest theatre, Triv of Trivial Theatre, very kindly agreed to send me a copy over amongst a haul of other movies to help subsidise the shipping and import costs, for which I'm truly grateful. Because this film? It's the best kind of nuts you can think of, and there really isn't much out there quite like it. So the film opens with us being introduced to the crew members of the starship USS Intercourse. The crew include Captain Daniel Tracy, Mike, Dick, and Steve. Intergalactic special agents from Earth, helping keep the universe in order, working on behalf of the caring Empress Vel. And as we join the crew, they've been asked to set a course for the glittering and exotic resort of Vegas in Space, the gem in the crown of the planet Clitoris located in the Beaver system. They're confused, however, as to why they're being asked to set a course there, as the Beaver system is famously for babes only, no dudes allowed. But once they're on the way, they pick up a dispatch from Empress Vel who explains things more clearly. Vel explains that in the last 24 hours she's received an urgent distress call from the Empress of Clitoris, Empress Nueva Gabor, who informs Vel that something gravely wrong is taking place on Vegas. There have been multiple freak natural disasters, and the political climate is turning dire. The crew appreciate the situation, but the point is raised that everyone on board has wieners, so how are they going to be able to land safely on Clitoris, as being a wiener owner is a very severe offence? Vel has the answer, as the ship has been prepared with sex reversal medication. Pink tablets that turn men into women, and blue tablets that do the reverse. Vel instructs the crew to take the tablets, and thereafter they should find feminine versions of their current uniforms in the sick bay. Their mission is to land on Vegas under the guise of being a mid-20th century lounge act sent as an entertainment gift on behalf of the Empire of the Empress Vel. And once integrated into Vegas, with the full blessing of Empress Gabor, they are to investigate life in Vegas and try to find out exactly what the issues are, and find a way to resolve them. Vel also warns the guys to be careful of her evil sister Veneer, who's the Queen of Police on Vegas. And with that, the guys take their sex reversal medications. But disaster strikes almost immediately when Dick tells the crew he's going to need 2 sex reversal tablets to ensure his masculinity is reversed, but shortly after taking the tablets he quite literally evaporates. The rest of the guys eye up their new feminine forms, and once fitted into their new uniforms, they decide they need new names to better blend in. To which end, Steve becomes Debbie, Mike becomes Sheila, and Captain Daniel Tracy becomes Captain Tracy Daniels. But, once again, disaster strikes, as the ship's onboard computer, Jane, goes blonde, right in the middle of a meteor shower, dragging the ship off course. For wiener-holding men, they'd never be able to find Clitoris. But, with the power of female intuition, the gang find Clitoris with no trouble at all and make their brave and bold landing on Vegas. On landing, they're greeted by Vice Empress Princess Angel, who offers to give them a tour of the key sites of Vegas before a more formal meeting with the Empress herself. The crew eagerly agree, and what follows is an extended tour of the sights, sounds and characters of Vegas in space, before we're eventually brought back around to the meeting with the Empress. The Empress is pleased to meet the ladies, and explains that Vegas is at real risk of completely disintegrating if something isn't done soon, as natural disasters in the form of earthquakes and explosions have rocked the Strip for days now, and for the first time in decades the residents and tourists of Vegas are having vivid nightmares. Empress Gabor isn't 100% certain what's causing this, but she believes it could be tied to a robbery that happened in the palace a while back in which the majority of her Gerlinium jewellery was stolen. Gerlinium is one of the rarest gemstones in the Beaver system, and it holds strange and mystic powers which Empress Gabor wielded in order to keep the gravitational field of planet Clitoris in delicate balance. With them gone, the orbit of the planet is beginning to drift, and if they aren't returned, or a replacement found ASAP, it could be deadly to the planet. At which point Queen Veneer arrives, dismissing the crew as amateurs and potential fashion victims and informing the Empress that she needs no help to recover the gems, and will do so promptly. Nevertheless, Gabor instructs Veneer to work with Captain Tracy on the case to find the jewel thief and restore Vegas, something she reluctantly agrees to. And with that, the film basically splits into 2 plots, as Sheila and Debbie continue to explore the wonderful weirdness of Vegas in space and try to find any information they can about potential thieves in the area, and prepare for their lounge act with some very important guests dropping by, including the Empress herself. Meanwhile, Queen Veneer and Captain Tracy begin to work together, as Veneer takes the captain back to her black and white detention centre, a place where crimes of fashion are detained, and Veneer performs cosmetic surgery on the inmates, desperate to cure them of their problems, and the pair slowly begin to figure out who could have possibly had motivations to steal the planet-controlling jewels. A clear prime suspect becomes apparent, leading to a third act of espionage, cabaret, and death to those who wear beige. In a vibrant third act showdown, will the crew catch their gal? Will Queen Veneer perfect her septuple chin lift procedure? And, oh man, these model shots. God damn, I'm in love. All this and more will be answered if you check out Vegas in Space. And what this film lacks in overall technical ability, it more than makes up for with frankly immaculate vibes. It's kind of hard to explain the film much more beyond that. This was a group of people who had almost no experience, even with domestic camcorders, deciding to make a film with everything they had. And it's rough and clunky and ragged around the edges, but it fucking works. It's got the magic in it, that passion and dedication to see something through to completion. It has the trust and belief of at least a dozen people behind it, and the end result is what I can only personally describe as lovable. The script is ropey. It's essentially drag acts improvising against each other after being briefed on the core plot and then let loose. And for 86 minutes, while our core cast of the crew, Veneer, Princess Angel and the Empress do their thing, these acts act as the backbone of the production, putting out some of the most bizarre and delightful dialogue I've heard in a film in a long time. It's bubbly, manic, hyperactive and positively glowing with energy. And these moments are some of the silliest, funniest parts that quite literally carry the film. The cast, for the main plot, are very much more precision-oriented. They don't get the same scope for improvisation that the supporting cast get, but their dialogue is much more crafted, more considered. If the supporting cast are firing comedy out scattergun style, the main plot cast have the delivery of a sniper rifle. Precise dialogue delivered in a very specific cadence and pacing to maximise the humour. The gags didn't always land with me, but the intention was very clear and for the most part very funny. And that's basically the whole tone of this film. Farce comedy laden with innuendos, double entendres and catty remarks designed to make you laugh at just how whimsical and dry these drag queens can be. Especially when they're enabled by such surreal and overtly campy world building. I absolutely fell in love with it. The plot itself may be paper thin and they pretty much figure out who done it by the halfway point, but that kind of isn't the point of this film. The point isn't the linear narrative, that's not the pull for the audience, and the writers knew this. What is the pull is putting these characters in a scenario and just seeing how they interact with each other. The plot is really more a means to an end than the life and death of this production, which I actually found quite refreshing. The pacing is actually, probably, the only real issue I had with this film. The first act tears out of the gate, getting everything pretty much established in 10 minutes or less, but by the time the first act transitions into the second, it started to run out of steam a little bit. They pretty much give away who the jewel thief is by the early half of the second act, and that basically leaves the entire film reliant on character set pieces up until about 10 minutes off the end. And while I can appreciate that the plot isn't really the reason you're watching this, or rather that the plot is just the sandbox for these characters to play in, it does become quite apparent once the thief's been outed that they didn't really consider how to manage that information up until the final confrontation, leaving a good 30 minutes of the film almost entirely at the mercy of the set pieces and the main cast saying, "We think X stole the jewels and we should do something about it," up until the closing moments. With the third act in particular really struggling to get off the ground, handing a not insignificant chunk of the runtime over to the crew's lounge act, which is a bit tepid if I'm being honest. It does get itself back on track by the time the finale rolls around, but I feel like the first half of the second act and the second half of the third act should have just been glued together. We'd lose 30 minutes, but it would have been an absolutely unrelenting rampage of a 60-minute feature as a result. The characters are all based on the actual drag act's actual onstage personas, so it's kinda hard to say, well, these are original and well-written characters, because a lot of them were just these performers' day jobs being captured on tape or film. I will say almost all of them are absolutely delightful. They work well in this film and the deliveries had me in stitches at times. I absolutely adored them, and are a big part of why I love this film, honestly. They make the runtime zip by, and even if it does get a little padding heavy in places, the characters make it very palatable. The script was written by Doris Fish, Miss X, and was co-written and directed by Philip R. Ford. Doris had little to no technical film skills, but had acted in films before, with 4 credits to their name. This was their only writing credit, and, as mentioned, they sadly passed away in 1991 at the age of 38, only a few months before the film was set to release. Miss X equally has 3 acting credits, but only 1 writing credit for this film. I'm of the belief that a lot of this was improvised, but maybe Doris and Miss X helped to shape some of the deliveries and line structurings, both for the supporting cast lines and their own, hence the writing credits. As for Philip, he has 2 directing credits and 1 writing credit, both for this film, and Vegas would be his second and last directed production, with his first film being a 15-minute short, 1982's Roller Coaster to Hell. On the direction front, I'm actually kind of surprised. Given this was a group with no prior technical ability barring a short, what's presented here is actually kind of competent, if not a little rough around the edges. Philip was pretty much flying solo on this front, with maybe the occasional hand to help set up lighting or manage sound or cast, and it shows. A lot of the camera work is locked off tripod shots, framing is generally mid-wide to mid due to the limitations of the apartment they were shooting in. But it does tell a pretty coherent story, and I feel like the energetic tone of the piece really shines through here in Philip's direction. As mentioned, the film's visual style reminded me heavily of the works of Tom Rubnitz, with maybe just a dash of Pee-wee's Playhouse, the B-52 style choices, and MST3K thrown in for good measure. The end result is a melting pot of colour and vivid imagery, and while the fundamentals aren't quite perfect and it's very much being shot for function over form, Philip isn't afraid to experiment here, with multiple psychedelic freak-out moments showcasing some real flair for a creative vision. It feels like a film trying to fight with one hand behind its back, and while part of me acknowledges that visually the stuff I like about this film came about through necessity due to the crew's inexperience, part of me would have been fascinated to know what a trained team who got this vision could have done with the time and money. Same goes for the Cine. It's basic compositions remixed in such an unusual and engaging way. They've really cranked the contrast here and created a vision that radiates on the screen. Sequences are roughly assembled, B-roll is kinda minimal, I'm assuming in part due to the budget and in part due to the fact that the crew probably didn't think they needed much coverage. And I won't go into continuity on this one because why bother? But what's here oozes such delightful magnetism, I was absolutely captivated by it. Whether it was the paper sets, the intricate costumes and makeup designs, the minimalist but curated model work, or the main sequences themselves, everything here is just off being right, but in so many ways that makes it so much better. Same goes for the edit. This absolutely could have had another couple of pass-throughs to refine it down, but this is a film that's going big and wants to respect the time the artists put into it. I sincerely believe very little was left on the cutting room floor here, and pretty much all of it is gold to anyone who actively seeks this type of thing out. Given it's a character-driven piece, it has to strike a real balance between refining the plot so that the film can keep moving forward, but not cutting it so much that the characters get blunted, and in that regard, I think they largely succeed. Performance-wise, where do I even begin? I'm just going to, at the top of things, say that basically everyone here is playing it as camp as Christmas. There's no room for subtlety, everyone is hamming it up to the nth degree, trying to one-up each other for mania and lack of subtlety. As such, I don't really know what would quantify a good performance by this metric, but I will say that Tippi as Princess Angel was a definite highlight, bringing a wonderful edge of psychopathy to a role that I really wasn't expecting that kind of edge on. They're vibrant, animate, and sharp as a pin. They don't miss a beat and got some of the bigger laughs and more interesting moments in my opinion. Miss X as Queen Vanir and Empress Vel is a dual role that I think has a wonderful pomposity with it. As Ven, there's an almost fairy godmother quality to the performance that sits wonderfully amongst all of the chaos. As Vanir, there's a scowling menace that bubbles just below the stern surface. It's a great range, and while Miss X takes a sledgehammer to both roles, it's all in the best way possible. Doris as Captain Tracy kinda draws a shorter straw on the big laugh moments, but makes up for it with a decent range and some solid deliveries. They also get at least 2 of the biggest laughs in the whole movie, which I thought was quite amicable. But it's really the supporting cast of characters that prop this film up. Too many to list here, but barely 5 minutes goes by without someone saying something that's an absolute slug to the guts in terms of a belly laugh. It's amazing they were able to keep the energy up, not just for the time they were on set, but that they were able to maintain that energy across the full production time. I have trouble remembering what I did yesterday sometimes, let alone drifting back into a character I half created for a house party years prior. And finally, the soundtrack. It's awesome. Super lo-fi keyboard synth bubblegum pop. It's bouncy, upbeat, and feels very much like the works of Frank Sidebottom and John Shuttleworth were given a glitzy, girly makeover. I adored it, and felt it was utilised incredibly well across the runtime. While the actual audio quality of the dialogue was a little bit patchy, very little got lost in translation. even if the DVD's subtitle track doesn't work properly and regularly gets stuck on random lines for blocks of 5 to 10 minutes at a time. Vegas in Space was released in October 1991, and after a very small touring theatrical run, it landed in front of the eyes of Lloyd Kaufman, who snatched up the distribution rights and released Vegas in Space on VHS in 1995 under the Troma Entertainment label. From there, in the UK, it received a very limited release on DVD by Revelation Films at some point in the early 2000s, before it received a much more well-known release in the US, once again under Troma in 2002 or 2003. I have conflicted info on that front. The picture quality isn't the best, though that's unsurprising as most of Troma's in-house remasters suffer from off-colour grading and over-compression, and that's pretty much the case here. What we have is the master tape used to dub the original 1995 release, essentially digitised and dumped on disc with very little cleaning, and a somewhat poorly aged introduction from Lloyd Kaufman, though in many ways that only works more to Troma's favour. Extras are surprisingly dense for this release, including a director's full feature commentary, footage from the film's premiere night, a teaser reel, interviews with the cast and other featurettes. While I'm always a sucker for a good making of, this could have been a very threadbare release, and they've really had a go of making something out of it. While it's not exactly the best way this film could be presented, for early DVD, it's really not half bad. At the time of writing, there's also a rumour circulating that a boutique label has recently given this film a ground-up remaster for a future Blu-ray and possibly 4K release. I have no idea how that'll look given the mixed media, but I will be a day one pre-order buyer on the day that thing drops, if that thing drops. God damn! The film is a testimony to self-actualization. Doris and Philip had a vision they believed in, and they gave their hearts, minds and souls to realise it. Especially Doris, without whom the sets, costumes, makeup, props and even scripting wouldn't have been possible. For me, I consider this a must-see picture. It's daft, irreverent and positively radiating positive energy. A film that begs you to check it out and delivers on every promise it sets up is a rare thing, but Vegas in Space more than delivers that. It's definitely worth your time.